The
Please,
groom
you know
refused
this is
her
the
at the
only
altar,
way.
so the
If you
Alpha
stand
King
against us
stepped
now,
forward and said,
everything we
"Then
fought for
she's
will be
mine."
lost.
Courtiers whispered among themselves, their eyes flicking toward the raised dais at the far end, where Lady Alara, draped in her wedding gown of pale silk, waited. The fabric clung to her like morning mist, shimmering with every subtle movement. Her hands were clasped tightly, the small trembling revealing a heart caught between hope and fear. She had dreamed of this day since childhood, imagining it filled with laughter, music, and the gentle warmth of love. Yet now, as the heavy doors of the hall opened, her chest tightened with anxiety. The music of the wedding procession began to play, a soft melody that seemed almost too fragile for the tension that hovered in the air. Every eye in the kingdom watched, waiting for the moment that would seal her fate. But moments can turn into nightmares in the blink of an eye. As the procession neared her, Alara's betrothed, Lord Darius, halted abruptly. His hand, which should have reached for hers, instead trembled and fell to his side. His face, pale and tight with fear, avoided her gaze entirely. A hush fell across the hall, broken only by the whispers of shocked courtiers. I cannot," Darius murmured, his voice cracking under the weight of shame and certainty. "I cannot marry you." Alara's heart stuttered, a cold wave washing over her. She blinked, unable to believe her ears. Her dreams, her careful preparations, the hope she had nurtured for years, all shattered in that single, devastating sentence. The hall seemed to tilt, colors blending, as if the world itself had lost balance. A single tear traced her cheek, and she hastily wiped it away, not willing to give the court the satisfaction of witnessing her weakness. Yet humiliation burned through her, sharper than any physical pain. She had been left standing at the altar, her future rejected, her honor questioned. Before she could gather herself, a voice rang out, deep and commanding, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Then she is mine." The hall froze. All eyes turned toward the speaker. A man stepped forward, and the very air seemed to bend around him. His presence was immense, magnetic, and undeniable. He was Kale, the Alpha King of the Northern Realms, a ruler whose name alone had inspired fear and reverence in equal measure. Cloaked in dark velvet trimmed with silver, his eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to pierce the soul. His voice was calm yet carried an authority that brooked no argument. Alara's breath caught. She did not know the king personally, but stories of his iron will and unmatched power were whispered in every corner of the realm. To be claimed by him, so publicly and without ceremony, would terrify most, but she felt something else. Confusion, intrigue, and a pulse of defiance. Kale's gaze met hers unflinching. "Step aside," he commanded the stunned Darius, who recoiled as if struck. "This lady shall come with me." A murmur rose from the crowd. Some whispered that the king had taken a fancy, others that he was punishing the bride for her broken engagement. Alara, however, felt none of those things. She felt a spark, a dangerous, unfamiliar curiosity that made her pulse quicken. Darius, too shaken to resist, stumbled backward. Kale extended a strong hand, and though Alara hesitated, she felt herself drawn toward him. The hall seemed to hold its breath as she walked forward, each step echoing like the tolling of a bell. The entire kingdom watched, but Alara's mind was a whirl of emotions: anger, humiliation, fear, and something more dangerous, the flutter of possibility. By the time they reached the outer gates, the whispers had become a hum, a river of speculation flowing behind them. The gates of the castle opened, and the cold northern wind hit her, carrying with it the scent of pine, rain, and the faint metallic tang of the sea. The world outside the Golden Hall was harsh and untamed, unlike anything she had ever known. Kale's hand remained extended, waiting. There was patience in it, a quiet command that left no room for hesitation. She took it, trembling, and as she did, she felt an unexpected warmth, the sense that, though he was a man of terrifying power, he was not cruel, not to her. As they rode through the mist-shrouded forest on black steeds, the castle fading behind them, Kale spoke for the first time in a low murmur meant only for her. "Do not fear me, Lady Alara. You will not regret this journey. I will not harm you." Alara, gripping the reins tightly, kept her eyes forward, yet the words settled in her heart like seeds in fertile soil. She wanted to believe them. Part of her wanted to rebel, to demand explanations, to question his sudden claim. But there was something magnetic about him, a power that demanded attention, respect, and unwillingly trust. The forest around them was ancient, the trees tall and imposing, their branches entwined like fingers of old spirits. Shadows moved strangely among the trunks, and the wind whispered in tones that made her skin prickle. Stories of the northern realms spoke of curses, restless spirits, and kings bound by secrets older than the mountains themselves. She shivered, not from cold, but from the thrill and fear of stepping into a world far larger than she had ever imagined. Hours passed in silence, the only sounds being the rhythmic beat of hooves and the distant call of a lone raven. Finally, they reached a fortress carved from dark stone atop a cliff overlooking a restless sea. Waves crashed against the rocks below, spraying mist into the air. The citadel was grand and foreboding, adorned with banners that fluttered violently in the wind, bearing the sigil of a silver wolf. Kale dismounted, and his movements were precise, controlled, each step resonating with authority. Alara followed, hesitant, her gown brushing against the wet stone. The gates creaked open, and inside torches flickered against the high walls, casting dancing shadows. The air smelled of smoke, sea salt, and old wood. He led her through the hallways of the fortress, passing portraits of kings and queens long dead, their eyes seeming to follow her with quiet judgment. Kale spoke rarely, but his presence was enough to make her aware of every heartbeat, every breath. There was power here, yes, but also a loneliness that gnawed at her curiosity. In the center of the citadel stood a room of immense size, its high ceilings carved with intricate patterns of wolves, moons, and stars. At the far end, a fire roared in a stone hearth, casting warmth into the cold room. Kale motioned for her to sit. She obeyed, though her mind was racing. "You have questions," he said, his voice softer now, almost intimate. "I will answer them when the time is right. For now, rest. Tomorrow your life begins anew." Alara nodded, though the concept of rest eluded her. She stared into the fire, seeing her reflection flicker among the flames. A life once planned had ended abruptly, and a new, uncertain path had opened. The weight of the day pressed down, heavy and unrelenting. Yet amidst the fear, a spark of something daring and dangerous ignited within her. Curiosity, hope, and the faintest glimmer of trust. Outside, the northern sky burned with red auroras, streaking across the heavens in a spectacular, otherworldly display. It was beautiful, yet unsettling. A wind swept through the towers, carrying a whisper that seemed to come from the stars themselves. "She belongs to the darkness, yet she may bring the light." Alara shivered and wrapped her arms around herself. The words were unintelligible, yet the feeling behind them resonated in her very bones. She had been abandoned, humiliated, thrust into the hands of a king whose reputation alone could intimidate armies. Yet she did not feel defeated. No, her spirit, though bruised, was not broken. Kale watched her from the shadows of the hall, silent and unreadable. In her, he saw defiance, resilience, and an unexpected fire, a fire that mirrored his own. It intrigued him, challenged him, and more than anything, unsettled him. He had never met anyone like her, and already he felt the stirrings of an emotion he thought long buried, something that combined fascination, longing, and perhaps redemption. The night deepened, and the fortress settled into a strange, tense calm. Alara lay in the guest chamber, staring at the ceiling, the auroras outside painting the walls in streaks of crimson and gold. Her mind replayed the day, the shock, the whispers, the public claim, and the looming presence of the Alpha King. She did not understand what the future held. She only knew that her life had irrevocably changed. And somewhere deep within the heart of the fortress, Kale murmured into the darkness, "You are mine, Lady Alara, yet not by force, by choice, and one day I will prove it." A storm raged outside, waves crashing against the cliffs, but inside, two hearts, so different, so proud, stood on the precipice of something neither fully understood. The night held secrets, and the dawn would demand answers. In that moment, Alara realized she was no longer just a lady abandoned at the altar. She was at the center of a story that would test courage, loyalty, and love itself. And though fear clutched at her, so did an unspoken, dangerous excitement. The citadel doors groaned in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, echoing across the cliffs, and the auroras above seemed to shimmer with intent, as if the world itself awaited the next move in this dark, beautiful game. Tomorrow, everything would change. The first light of dawn spilled through the tall, arched windows of Kale's citadel, painting the stone walls with shades of gold and rose. Lady Alara rose from the bed that felt both unfamiliar and strangely comforting. The events of the previous day, her abandoned wedding, the humiliation, the shocking claim by the Alpha King, still echoed in her mind, blending with a strange, uneasy curiosity about the man who had taken her into his fortress. She dressed in a simple gown of deep green silk, its folds soft against her skin. The clothing was modest, yet elegant, and somehow it felt like the beginning of a new chapter, though she did not yet know what role she would play in it. When she stepped into the hallway, she found Kale already there, standing by the window with his back to her. The morning light caught the sharp angles of his face, the silver thread in his dark hair, and the intensity of his gaze fixed on the distant cliffs. "Alara," he said without turning. "Come," she hesitated. Even though he had claimed her, the thought of following him so freely still filled her with a tension that was hard to describe, fear, defiance, and somewhere beneath it all, a strange trust. Slowly, she moved closer. Kale turned then, and the air between them seemed to tighten. "You will dine with me," he said simply, "and then you will understand why I claimed you. You may resist, but know this, there is no harm meant to you, only guidance, only protection." Alara's lips pressed together, torn between pride and curiosity. She had not expected kindness from the man the kingdom whispered about in fear-filled tones. Yet there was something in his calmness, the certainty of his movements, that made her feel safe, despite the strangeness of the place. The dining hall was immense, its ceilings vaulted, with silver candelabras lining the walls. The fire from the hearth cast flickering shadows that danced across the marble floor. Kale motioned for her to sit, and she obeyed, her fingers brushing lightly against the cold surface of the polished table. He seated himself opposite her, and a moment of silence passed. Neither of them spoke at first, allowing the gravity of the situation to settle between them. Alara observed him. Kale was a man who carried the weight of his realm in every movement, every measured breath. And yet behind the strength and authority she thought she glimpsed something softer, a loneliness, a longing, a quiet sadness hidden behind the mask of the Alpha King. "You must have many questions," he said finally, his voice low and even. "I will answer them, but not all at once. The day is long, and patience will serve you better than demand." Alara's heart skipped. He spoke with authority, yes, but also with a consideration she had not expected. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. The truth was, she did have questions. How could he claim her? Why would a king, a man so powerful and feared, take such an interest in her? Yet something in the way he regarded her, the way his eyes softened at moments, the quiet power of his presence, made her wonder if there was more to this man than the kingdom's tales suggested. The morning passed slowly. Kale spoke little, answering her few questions in measured tones. He described the fortress, the history of his reign and the lands under his protection. He spoke of the northern forests, ancient magic, and the responsibilities that weighed upon him as king. Alara listened intently, her mind weaving together the pieces of this world she had never known and her role in it. By midday, Kale suggested a walk along the cliffs overlooking the sea. The wind was sharp, tugging at her hair and gown as they stepped onto the high battlements. Waves crashed against the rocks below, white foam rising like smoke from a distant fire. The smell of salt and pine filled the air, mingling with the scent of damp stone and burning torches from the fortress below. "Do you know why I claimed you?" Kale asked, his voice carrying over the roar of the waves. Alara shook her head. "I do not understand. I am no one of importance to the throne. Why me?" Kale's gaze swept across the horizon, and then he looked at her directly. "Because you have fire, defiance, strength. Most would cower or bow or beg. You do not." His voice softened almost imperceptibly. "And the land, the people, they recognize it. You are a storm wrapped in silk, and the world needs storms." Alara's breath caught. His words were unlike any she had heard before, truthful, powerful, and yet strangely intimate. She wanted to speak, to ask more, but the wind stole her words. Instead, she nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his meaning. For hours, they walked along the cliffs, their silence punctuated only by the cries of seabirds and the crash of waves. Alara felt the tension between them grow, a charged awareness that was neither threatening nor comfortable, yet impossible to ignore. She caught herself stealing glances at Kale, wondering what drove the loneliness behind his strong exterior, what pain lay hidden beneath his iron will. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the world in shades of blood-red and gold, Kale turned to her. "There is more to this world than you have ever known," he said, "and more to me than most realize, but you will see it if you are willing to stay, to learn, and to understand." Alara's heart beat fast. She wanted to retreat, to return to the safety of her old life, yet some part of her, the part that had survived humiliation and heartbreak, urged her to take a step forward. She met his gaze, firming her resolve. "I will stay. I will listen. I will try to understand." Kale's expression softened, and for the first time a hint of a smile touched his lips. "Good," he said simply. "Tomorrow we begin." The evening descended, and the fortress came alive with torches and flickering shadows. Alara was shown to her chambers, which were spacious yet simple, decorated with tapestries of wolves and moons, the sigil of Kale's lineage. She unpacked her few belongings, her hands trembling slightly from the events of the day. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She was far from home, far from the life she had known, yet she felt a spark of something new, something dangerous and alive. That night, sleep was slow to come. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments of the day, the shock of the altar, the king's claim, the walk along the cliffs. And always Kale's presence lingered in her mind, a shadow and a light all at once. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it whispers from the forest, rumors of ancient magic that lingered in the northern lands. The fortress seemed to breathe with life, each shadow flickering with secrets, each corner hiding history. Alara felt the weight of it all, the responsibility, the danger, and the opportunity. She was no longer a passive observer of her life. She had been thrust into a world of power, mystery, and destiny. The next morning brought a cold, clear dawn. Kale entered her chamber without knocking, a gesture of authority that she did not resist. "The day begins," he said. "You must learn the ways of this place and of me. Knowledge is protection, Alara, and protection is power." She rose, straightening her back, determination hardening her spine. "I will learn," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. They began the day with lessons in the halls of the fortress, history, strategy, and the subtle rules of power. Kale was a patient teacher, though his eyes often betrayed a keen assessment, measuring her reactions, her resolve, and her courage. Alara listened, questioned, and absorbed, aware that each word, each gesture was shaping her into someone she had never imagined becoming. By midday, Kale led her to the training grounds, a vast courtyard overlooking the cliffs. Guards and warriors practiced their craft, their movements precise and disciplined. Kale handed her a practiced sword, and though her hands trembled, she held it with the determination that had drawn him to her in the first place. "You must learn to defend yourself," he said. "Not because the world is cruel, but because those who wield power are often challenged, and those who cannot defend themselves are lost." They trained for hours, Alara stumbling and recovering, sweat mixing with the salt spray from the sea below. Kale's guidance was firm but not unkind, his corrections precise, his praise rare but meaningful. With each strike, each parry, she felt herself grow, not only stronger in body but in spirit. She began to understand the strength that had drawn the king's attention, the power in defiance tempered by wisdom. As the sun sank low, painting the sky in crimson and violet, Kale paused, letting her catch her breath. "You are stronger than most expect," he said. "Stronger than you may yet know." Alara looked at him, the words stirring something deep within her. The humiliation of yesterday felt distant now, replaced by a sense of possibility and purpose. She realized that while she had been abandoned once, she was no longer powerless. She had been claimed, yes, but not just by him. She had claimed herself in her determination to endure, to learn, and to grow. A sudden shadow fell across the courtyard. Both turned, and at the edge of the cliffs, a figure cloaked in dark robes watched them, the wind tugging at the edges of the fabric. The figure's eyes glowed faintly, a warning that not all in the northern lands welcomed the Alpha King's choices. Kale's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, his stance protective. Alara's pulse quickened. She had glimpsed the power of this world, and now she saw the danger that lurked in its corners. The figure spoke, voice low and chilling. "The queen you claim, she may unlock what has been bound for centuries. But beware, Alpha King. The choice must be hers or all will be lost." Alara and Kale exchanged a glance, the weight of the words settling heavily upon them. The day's lessons, the walk along the cliffs, the training, all had prepared them for strength, but not yet for the trials that awaited. The wind howled, carrying the figure's warning away, and the shadows deepened across the courtyard. The auroras in the distant sky shimmered again, crimson and gold streaking across the heavens like blood and fire. Alara realized, with a mixture of fear and anticipation, that her journey had only begun. She was no longer a lady abandoned at the altar. She was at the center of a storm, and the storm was far from over. Kale's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw the full depth of his intent, the promise, the challenge, and the unspoken understanding that their fates were intertwined. Together, they would face trials, shadows, and dangers that neither could face alone. And somewhere deep in the northern lands, ancient forces stirred, watching the Alpha King and the lady who had been claimed, waiting for the moment when their power and courage would be tested. Alara's heart raced, but it was no longer with fear alone. It was with resolve. She would endure. She would learn. And perhaps in the process she would discover the strength not only to survive but to thrive in this new, dangerous world. The sun dipped below the horizon, the auroras painting the sky one final time that night. And as darkness fell, a single thought echoed in Alara's mind. The journey was only beginning, and nothing would ever be the same again. The northern forest stretched endlessly, a dense canopy of towering pines and ancient oaks that whispered secrets to those who dared to listen. Mist clung to the ground like a living thing, curling around roots and rocks as though the earth itself were breathing. Lady Alara rode beside Kale, her cloak pulled tight against the chill, the wind tangling her hair. The journey from the citadel to the ruins of Eldershade was treacherous. Few dared traverse these woods, and even fewer returned unscarred. "Alara," Kale said, his voice low, carrying over the sound of hooves against the damp earth, "the forest tests all who enter. It senses fear, doubt, and weakness. You must keep your heart steady. Alara nodded, though her pulse quickened. The first day in the forest had already challenged her in ways she had not imagined. Shadows moved strangely among the trees, shapes that seemed almost human yet impossible. A chill ran along her spine whenever she felt eyes upon her, and Kale's presence beside her was both comforting and unnerving. He was the Alpha King, a man whose power could command armies, yet here, even he moved with caution, aware of the hidden dangers in the ancient woods. Hours passed, the path winding through thick undergrowth, over moss-covered stones, and across shallow streams that glimmered with a strange, silver light. The forest seemed alive, almost sentient, as though it were testing them, preparing them for something far greater than mere travel. "Ilara," Kale said suddenly, stopping at the edge of a clearing, "we are close." She looked where he pointed. The ruins of Eldershade rose from the mist like the bones of an old giant, stone walls crumbling, covered in ivy and lichen. Broken archways framed glimpses of a long-forgotten throne room, and statues of winged creatures loomed over the overgrown courtyard, their eyes hollow yet commanding. There was a quiet majesty to the place, and yet it radiated unease, as if the air itself held a warning. They dismounted, Kale's hand firm on the hilt of his sword. "Stay close," he warned. "The ruins are ancient and protected. Spirits linger here, and not all are friendly." Alara followed, her steps cautious yet determined. Her hands brushed against the cold stone, and she felt a strange energy thrumming beneath her fingers, as though the ruins themselves recognized her presence. She glanced at Kale. Even in this place of shadows and uncertainty, he moved with confidence, every sense alert, every motion calculated. Yet there was something in his eyes, a shadow of doubt, or perhaps a memory of past loss, that made her heart ache. They reached the central hall, where the remnants of a great throne still stood. Sunlight filtered through the broken roof, dust motes dancing like tiny stars in the beams. Kale approached the throne, running his hand along its carved edges. "This was once the seat of power," he murmured. "Now it is a place of trial." Alara's curiosity outweighed her fear. "Trial?" she asked. Kale nodded, his expression grave. "The curse that binds me is old, older than even the oldest kings. To break it, we must face its guardians and prove our strength and trust. Eldershade will test us, both individually and together. If we fail—" He let the words hang in the air, unfinished. Alara swallowed, the weight of his meaning settling in her chest. She had endured humiliation and betrayal, had survived a claim by a man of immense power, and yet now she faced something far more mysterious and frightening. The unseen forces of magic, the remnants of ancient wrath. And Kale, as powerful as he was vulnerable here. Vulnerable in ways no one else had ever seen. Their first trial came swiftly. Shadows gathered in the corners of the hall, coalescing into shapes that moved with unnatural grace. They whispered words of doubt and fear, voices that mimicked friends and family, twisting memories to unsettle them. Alara felt a pang of longing for home, a stab of fear at the unknown, and she faltered. Kale's hand found hers, grounding her. "Focus," he commanded softly. "They feed on uncertainty. Do not let them in." Together, they moved through the hall, confronting the illusions with courage and clarity. Alara realized that her fear was not to be suppressed, but acknowledged and controlled. Every step strengthened her resolve, every word of encouragement from Kale binding them closer together. They were learning to trust, not just each other but themselves. Hours turned into a day, and then another. They crossed courtyards where vines reached like grasping fingers, navigated corridors where the floor seemed to shift beneath their feet, and solved riddles etched into walls in a language long forgotten. With every challenge, Alara grew stronger, not only in skill but in spirit. She saw the man behind the king, the weight he bore, the loneliness, the regrets, and she felt a deep, unspoken connection forming between them. Kale, too, began to reveal himself in small ways. His patience with her was not a simple courtesy. It was recognition of her courage, her resilience. In fleeting moments, he allowed glimpses of vulnerability, his fingers brushing against hers with a caution born of fear, a rare smile when she solved a particularly tricky puzzle, a quiet acknowledgement when she saved him from a shadow that had nearly ensnared him. Yet the forest and ruins did not relent. On the third day they encountered the guardian, a spectral wolf, its eyes glowing like molten silver, its presence commanding and terrifying. It circled them, a predator born of magic and ancient will. Kale stepped forward, his stance protective, his sword drawn. "This is the test," he said to Alara. "Stand your ground, trust in yourself and in me." Alara's heart pounded. She gripped her practiced sword, feeling its weight in her hands, and nodded. The wolf lunged, and instinct took over. She dodged, struck, and moved with precision, guided by Kale's steady commands. It was not just a battle of strength, but of courage and unity. Every time she faltered, Kale was there, his presence a tether, his voice steadying her. Finally, the wolf paused, its form shimmering, and then it dissolved into a cascade of silver light. The test was over, but the lesson remained. Trust and courage were stronger than fear. That evening, they made camp in a small clearing within the ruins. A fire crackled, sending sparks into the mist, and the two of them sat in silence, exhaustion settling over them. Alara gazed into the flames, thinking of the day's trials, the fear she had faced, and the unexpected admiration and respect she had felt for Kale. He watched her quietly, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "You are not like anyone I have known," he said. "Most would break under this, yet you endure. You challenge me, and yet you follow. You are remarkable." Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had expected harsh words, commands, or criticism. Instead, she heard respect and something else, something that made her heart ache with a mixture of fear and longing. "Kale," she said softly, "I am learning. I want to understand. I want to be strong, not just for you, but for myself." His gaze softened and he nodded. "Good, that is all I ask. Courage is not the absence of fear, Alara, it is the will to act despite it, and you have that in abundance." The night deepened and the forest whispered around them, ancient and knowing. The auroras above shimmered faintly, casting ghostly light across the clearing. Alara lay awake, thinking of the trials they had faced, the bond forming between them, and the unknown challenges still ahead. She realized, with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, that she had come far from the lady abandoned at the altar. She was part of something larger, something magical, something that demanded strength, wisdom, and heart. Kale remained awake as well, watching the fire, silent but alert. He thought of the prophecy that had been whispered to him by the shadowed figure, the warning that Alara's heart must be willing, or all would be lost. He had claimed her publicly, yes, but her trust, her choice, was what truly mattered. And for the first time in decades, he feared not for the kingdom, but for the fragile bond growing between them, the tender trust, the flicker of hope, the dangerous possibility of love. The following day brought a new trial. They entered a chamber buried beneath the ruins, where the walls glowed faintly with runes that pulsed like heartbeat. The air was thick with magic, pressing against them, testing their resolve. Kale and Alara moved together, their steps synchronized, their breaths even. Shadows formed, shapes that mirrored their own doubts and fears, twisting their reflections into illusions of failure, betrayal, and despair. Alara trembled, but Kale's hand found hers again. "Together," he said simply. "We face it together." And together they did. Each illusion dissolved before them, each shadow dispersed by courage, trust, and unity. The chamber glowed brighter, the runes calming as though acknowledging their victory. Emerging from the ruins, they found the forest quiet, the mist retreating, the auroras above shining with unusual brilliance. The trials had not ended, Kale knew, but they had taken a step forward. Alara had shown strength, courage, and heart. He had shown restraint, guidance, and trust, and in the process, something deeper had begun to bloom, an unspoken bond, a connection forged in shadows, fire, and fear. Yet as they rode back toward the citadel, Kale's gaze lingered on the horizon. Somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the cliffs, forces waited. Ancient powers that had watched their every move, that had tested their courage and would test it again. And he knew, with an unease he could not shake, that the greatest trials were yet to come. Alara sensed his tension, though he spoke not a word. Her heart had grown strong, yet the shadow of danger reminded her that this was only the beginning. The bond between them had deepened, fragile and fierce, like a flame that could both warm and burn. As night fell, the auroras blazed crimson and gold, and the wind whispered through the northern forest, carrying a promise and a warning. The journey was far from over, and the storm they faced together was only just gathering strength. And in that moment, amidst the silence and the shadows, Alara understood something profound. She had chosen to stay, and in doing so, she had claimed more than survival. She had claimed her place beside the Alpha King, in a world of danger, magic, and heart. But the forest, the ruins, and the ancient powers beyond would demand more. And when they did, Alara and Kale would need to stand not just as allies, but as something stronger, something unbreakable. The auroras shimmered one last time before the night claimed the sky, and somewhere deep in the northern lands, the guardians of old stirred, aware that the lady and the king had begun to awaken their destinies. Alara's breath caught. She was no longer just a lady claimed. She was a force in her own right, and the shadow of what was to come loomed closer with every heartbeat. The sky above the Alpha Citadel was a storm of gray and violet, clouds swirling like restless spirits over the cliffs. Waves crashed violently against the jagged rocks below, sending plumes of white spray into the cold wind. Lady Alara stood beside Kale on the highest balcony, the wind tugging at her cloak and hair. The trials of Eldershade had strengthened her, sharpened her senses, and awakened courage she had never known. Yet nothing had prepared her for what awaited inside the fortress that night. Kale's expression was grave, his jaw tight, eyes reflecting the gathering storm. "Tonight we face the heart of the curse," he said. "It will test us in ways that are physical, mental, and personal, but together we may break it." Alara nodded. Fear coiled in her stomach, but it was tempered by determination. She had survived abandonment, illusions, shadows, and spectral guardians. She had learned to trust herself, to trust Kale, and in the process she had discovered a strength within herself that she could never ignore. The entrance to the chamber of the curse was hidden behind a massive, carved door deep within the citadel. Kale pushed it open, revealing a room bathed in flickering torchlight, walls etched with ancient runes that pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of some immense, hidden being. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it, a crystalline orb that shimmered with colors that were impossible to name, swirling like captured storms. "This is it," Kale said, voice low. "The heart of the curse. It has held me prisoner for centuries, bound by magic older than any living memory. And now, we must confront it." Alara stepped closer, her fingers brushing the orb. A shock of energy ran through her, not harmful but intense, as though the orb were reading her very soul. Visions flashed behind her eyes, fear, loneliness, betrayal, and shadowed images of the past, the faces of kings and queens long gone, the remnants of promises broken. She gasped, staggering back slightly. Kale's hand found hers, grounding her. "Do not fight it alone," he said. "Let your heart guide you and trust in what we have built together." They moved toward the orb together, their hands touching it simultaneously. Immediately, the chamber shifted. Shadows rose from the floor, twisting into forms that resembled Kale's past, enemies, lost allies, and the memory of a woman he had once loved and failed. The illusions circled him, whispering doubt and guilt. Alara gripped his hand tightly. "You are not alone," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her own heart. "You have me. I will not leave you, and I will not let this darkness claim you." Kale's eyes met hers, and for a moment the mask of the king fell away. She saw the man beneath, the pain, the fear, the longing he had carried for centuries. Her words were a lifeline, and he clung to them, finding strength in her resolve. Together, they faced the illusions. Kale's sword struck shadows, and Alara's courage pushed back the whispers of doubt. The orb pulsed faster, brighter, until the chamber was filled with blinding light. They felt the weight of centuries pressing upon them, yet neither faltered. Their hands remained linked, their hearts beating in sync, a rhythm of trust and defiance. Suddenly, the light coalesced into a single figure, a spectral guardian, its form humanoid but shimmering with raw energy. Its voice was like a chorus of whispers, old and eternal. To break the curse, both hearts must beat willingly. One cannot force the other nor act in fear. Only trust, courage, and truth can sever these chains. Alara inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the moment. She looked at Kale and saw not just a king, not just a powerful man, but a person who had suffered, who had loved and lost, and who had chosen to protect rather than dominate. She knew what she must do. "I choose to stand with you," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "Not because I am forced, not because I am afraid, but because I believe in you and in us." Kale's grip on her hand tightened, and he felt a rush of emotion he had long buried. "And I choose you," he replied, his voice strong yet trembling. "Not as a king claiming a subject, but as a man choosing a partner, a friend, a heart that will stand with mine." The Guardian's light flared, swirling around them, lifting the shadows and fears into the air, dissolving them into sparks that drifted like tiny stars. The orb cracked, and a warm, golden light spread throughout the chamber. The centuries-old curse had begun to unravel, its grip loosening, replaced by a sense of liberation and possibility. Exhausted but exhilarated, they sank to the floor, hands still clasped. Alara's eyes glistened, reflecting the glow of the chamber. "We did it," she whispered. Kale nodded, but his expression was thoughtful. "The curse is broken, yes," he said, "but the world will not forget. There are still those who will challenge us, who will test what we have gained. But together, we are stronger than any threat." They emerged from the chamber into the night, the storm outside having calmed to a gentle drizzle, the auroras above painting the sky in soft shades of green and gold. The citadel felt different, lighter, alive in a way it had not been for centuries. Guards and courtiers who had feared Kale's wrath now watched with awe, sensing the change, sensing that something profound had occurred. In the quiet of the balcony, Kale turned to Alara. "You have changed everything," he said softly. "Not just the curse, not just me, but this place, and perhaps even the kingdom." Alara smiled, tired but radiant. "And you have changed me," she replied. "I was lost before, uncertain and afraid. Now I know what courage feels like, what trust feels like, and what it means to stand beside someone fully, not behind them or before them, but with them." Kale's hand brushed her cheek gently, a rare and intimate gesture. The power between them was not one of dominance or fear, but of respect, understanding, and something deeper, an emotional bond forged in trials, shadows, and shared courage. The weeks that followed were filled with rebuilding and preparation. Kale and Alara worked together, strengthening the citadel, tending to the people, and teaching the next generation of warriors and scholars the lessons they had learned: courage, trust, and the power of hearts aligned. Their relationship deepened, no longer defined by claim or authority, but by choice, respect, and the growing affection that neither had expected but both had embraced. Yet the northern lands held secrets still. Whispers of ancient forces lingered in the wind, shadows of the past brushing against the edges of the present. But Kale and Alara faced each challenge with strength born not only of skill and power, but of unwavering trust and love. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of crimson and violet, Kale and Alara stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea, the waves sparkling in the dying light. He took her hand, turning her to face him. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together. No curse, no shadow, no fear can separate us if we do not allow it." Ilara's eyes glistened with tears she did not try to hide. "Together," she echoed. "Always." The wind carried their words across the cliffs, across the forests, and into the distant mountains. The auroras shimmered one final time that night, a promise of hope, of new beginnings, and of hearts that had endured shadow and trial, emerging stronger, wiser, and united. For Kale, the Alpha King, and Alara, the lady who had been abandoned at the altar, the journey had transformed them both. They had faced darkness, fear, and the remnants of ancient curses, yet they had chosen trust, courage, and love. And in doing so, they had claimed not only each other but a future bright with possibility. As they stood together, hands entwined, hearts beating in quiet synchrony, the northern land seemed to sigh in relief, the ancient magic acknowledging the union, the courage, and the love that had defied fear and darkness. And though the world would continue to test them, though shadows and challenges would rise again, Kale and Alara knew one unshakable truth. They were stronger together, their bond forged in fire and shadow, unbreakable and eternal. The storm had passed, the curse had ended. And from the ruins of fear, betrayal, and despair, a new dawn had risen, a dawn of trust, courage, and enduring love. Ilara rested her head on Kale's shoulder, feeling the steady strength of his presence. "We did it," she murmured softly. Kale smiled, a rare, gentle expression that touched the depths of her heart. "Yes," he replied, his voice low and full of certainty. "Together always." And under the shimmering auroras, with the northern winds whispering through the cliffs and forests, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it as one. Hearts united, spirits strong, and love unyielding, the Alpha King and his lady looked forward to a future they would shape together, bold, fearless, and free.